the impending likelihood, and obviously we can't say it's gone ahead until the Patriarch of Constantinople issues a Tomos, which could be probably, I've been told, sometime maybe next month, of the Ukrainian Orthodox faithful receiving Autocephaly independence from Russia, will be, without exaggeration, an earthquake for Moscow. This is the same as 1991 with the collapse of the USSR in terms of its impact. And Ukraine was at the center of both. If Ukraine's declaration of independence in 1991 was the event that basically put a nail in the coffin of the USSR, because President Boris Yeltsin came to Kyiv to try to renegotiate something, and then chairman of the Ukrainian parliament, Leonid Kravchuk, said it's over. Then today, Ukraine's Autocephaly for the Orthodox Church is the end, or the nail in the coffin, for Putin's Russky Mir, the Russian world. Because Putin's Russky Mir, Russian world, is based completely on the idea of a kind of a perpetual and revived Kyiv Rus of the three Eastern Slavs. And you can't have a Russian world, a Russky Mir, without Kyiv as part of it. Because Kyiv is, in Russian nationalist eyes, in Putin's eyes, Kyiv is the supposed birthplace of the, inverted commas, Russian people. And by Russian people here he means the three Eastern Slavs. So Ukraine's Autocephaly is literally the equivalent of 1991, and hence the very radical comments coming out of Moscow and the emergence of this Russian Orthodox Church separatism, where they no longer will pray for the Constantinople Patriarch in Russian Orthodox churches, and where they've resolutely condemned Constantinople, bringing in two exarchs, two representatives from the US and Canada, to be its representatives in Ukraine, as the kind of final stages to soothe and smooth the transfer to an autocephalous status. There are, I think, many factors involved as to why today, as opposed to in the past, this is happening. And let's not forget that Leonid Kravchuk supported the separation of then Metropolitan Filaret from the Russian Orthodox Church. He created the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Kyiv Patriarch in the early 90s. So there have been various attempts to try and push this forward. Obviously, it was strongest under Kravchuk, and then under Viktor Yuschenko. Leonid Kuchma tried to be even-handed between both churches, and of course Yanukovych was completely in support of the Russian Orthodox Church. I think what made it more likely today was a number of factors. Firstly, President Petro Poroshenko is not, I don't think, perceived in Constantinople as some kind of nationalist. And that was the image that Viktor Yushchenko had. And of course, Viktor Yushchenko was had a portrayal of a nationalist anti-Russian figure who was strongly supportive of the Kyiv Patriarchate. That's not true of Petro Poroshenko. He's a member of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is the official name for the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. He's a relatively senior member, somebody who's donated money to that church. So he's emerged from the church, which is now pushing in support of autocephaly. That's very important, I think, for Constantinople to show that there's movement towards autocephaly, not only within the two, shall we say, Ukrainian churches, the Kyiv Patriarchate led by Patriarch Filaret, and the smaller Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, but also from within the ranks of the Russian Orthodox Church as well. Because it's basically going to, the new church, the new Autocephalous Church, will be the faithful from those three coming together to create a new church. And people outside of that who don't agree with that will be renamed the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Another factor which works in Ukraine's favor today is the fact that there's a war. It has gone. This is another example of how Russia's military aggression has worked, has shot in the foot of Vladimir Putin and has worked against Russian interests. It obviously hasn't gone unnoticed in Constantinople that Russia, including Russian Orthodox, are killing brother or fellow Ukrainian Orthodox. This has been made obviously publicly evident by the fact that quite a few Russian Orthodox priests have supported Russian troops and have supported Russian mercenaries and nationalists going to fight in the Donbas. That was evident in a big expose in the New York Times in the autumn of 2014 about the Russian Orthodox Church, and also more recently, throughout Ukraine, Russian Orthodox priests and bishops have refused to give services for killed Ukrainian servicemen, Ukrainian soldiers. I think the epitome of this was at in an event in the Ukrainian parliament honoring Ukrainian soldiers, where the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine refused to stand. It was obvious in the Ukrainian parliament that everybody was standing in honor of these Ukrainian soldiers, and the Russian Orthodox leadership did not stand. Russia's brutal antics in the Balkans did wonders for Ukraine, as usual. Again, this is another example of Russian kind of brusque, chauvinistic sort of bullying, whether it's in the US elections, whether it's in Britain with Skripal, whether it's in Western Europe. Russia's antics in the Balkans worked also against it. Russia's spies have been expelled from Greece just this year for interfering in the attempt to normalize and have a reconciliation between Macedonia and Greece, with Greece agreeing to a kind of a compromise for Macedonia's new name, and also for Russian attempts to undertake and organize a coup d'etat in Montenegro with the support of kind of pro-Russian forces there to stop Montenegro joining NATO. So all of this also turned away countries which are traditionally pro-Russian in the Orthodox world, countries like Bulgaria and Greece. I was told, for example, by a Ukrainian presidential representative just this week that when there was a synod of bishops in Bulgaria, a senior Russian Orthodox official was there, and he demanded that they do as the Russian Orthodox Church wanted. And the head of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church got up and said, look, this is Bulgaria, not Russia. We'll do what we decide to do. So it's this kind of chauvinistic and bullying that has certainly turned away. And that was important as well because of the 14 Orthodox churches, 4 or 5 or so would have been pro-Russian. So that number dwindled. And that also tilted the balance in favor of Ukraine. I think other factors which are working in favor of Ukraine are that, let's not forget, and this is always wrong for Western journalists to talk of this, there is no such thing as a as a kind of a Catholic West and Orthodox Eastern Ukraine. This is not the way Ukraine is divided on religion. The Catholic Church or the Greek Catholic Church is not dominant in Western Ukraine. It's only dominant in 3 oblasts of Galicia. But if you take together the 7 oblasts of Western Ukraine, those that were annexed in World War II, then 4 of the 7 are actually oblasts with Orthodox majorities in Volyn, Chernivtsi, and Transcarpathia. And also, the majority of Ukrainian Orthodox parishes are in Western Central Ukraine. They're not in Eastern Ukraine. When you drive around the Donbas, as I've found, what's noticeable is the lack of churches in villages and small towns. This is very different to Western Central Ukraine, where you have, 3 or 4 churches in a village. So Southern Ukraine is a bit different because you have, I think, more organized religion in Kherson, in Odessa, and that, but certainly not in Eastern Ukraine. And that means that a huge proportion, probably a majority, of members of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, remember it's called the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, actually lie in Western Central Ukraine, which supported the Orange and Euromaidan revolutions. That means that there won't be any kind of civil war if there's autocephaly. There won't be a violent conflict, as some politicians are saying it will, because most of those faithful are Ukrainian patriots and are often Ukrainian speakers, who actually have been turned away from that church because of events since 2014. So another final factor to take into account is that it's again a myth that Russia is somehow this spiritual religious center, because Ukrainians are far more religious than Russians. There are approximately the same number of Orthodox parishes in both countries, 14,000. And in the USSR, in fact, 2/3 of the Russian Orthodox Church, 2/3 of the parishes of the Russian Orthodox Church were in Soviet Ukraine. So Ukrainians are far more religious than Russians, and that is another, I think, reason why Moscow is so adamantly opposed to autocephaly, because it loses this huge number of believers, and it also loses, of course, the income from those churches and parishes. From Constantinople's point of view, having an autocephalous Ukrainian church means that it has 2 allies two large allies on its side: Romania, which has a large Orthodox church, and Ukraine. Russia is no longer the big boy in town. Obviously the new Ukrainian Orthodox Church will not be anti-Western, anti-European. It will be pro-European, which would make it very different to the xenophobically anti-Western Russian Orthodox Church. So there's a huge number of factors riding on this drive to autocephaly, for Russia, it really is another 1991. From the viewpoint of Russian-Ukrainian relations, it shows the end of Russian soft power in Ukraine. The Russian Orthodox Church was basically the last vehicle through which Russia maybe had some kind of influence in Ukraine. Since 2014, you've had a steady decline in the importance of soft power for Russia in Ukraine. Up till 2014, you had very strong corrupt trade and energy links between Ukrainian and Russian elites. You had huge numbers of Ukrainians who use Russian social media. So more Ukrainians, for example, use VKontakte than they use Facebook. That's no longer the case. Ukrainians used Russian email addresses as opposed to Gmail. Again, that's no longer the case. Ukrainians watched Russian TV, read Russian books, watched Russian websites. All of that has been closed down. The last really important source of Russian soft power and influence in Ukraine was the Russian Orthodox Church. And with autocephaly, that means that that's gone. So literally you are, as it were, liberating yourself from Russia's dominant influence. For Russia, this is really explosive, really is an earthquake, because Putin keeps repeating the myths of Kyiv Rus being the birthplace of the Russian people. Now, if Ukraine is not part of that Russian world, if Ukraine has a separate Orthodox, independent Orthodox Church, then how can Russia say that? Everything in terms of Russian-Ukrainian relations is turned on its head. It's Ukrainians who are the elder brothers, not Russians. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that 2 years ago, Vladimir Putin unveiled a monument to Grand Prince Vladimir in Moscow. Grand Prince Vladimir ruled Kyiv Rus at a time when Moscow did not even exist. So again, Russia's claims to Kiev are based completely on mythology, and this will have to be reviewed and changed after the establishment of an independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And on a final note, that will also affect Western historians. Western historians of Russia also continue to peddle these imperialistic myths about a kind of, about Kiev and Russia, in inverted commas, moving to Vladimir Suzdal, then to Muscovy, then to the Russian Empire and USSR. And without giving any real importance to Ukrainians or any idea where Ukrainians came from. If you pick up a typical history of Russia written by a Western author, they peddle the same imperialistic myths about so-called Russian history in Kyiv Rus as does Putin. What are they now going to write? Maybe they need to start reading Oris Subtelny, Paul Robert Magochi, Sergei Plokhy's History of Ukraine to get a better idea of really how these two nations, Russians and Ukrainians, emerged. Because for Russians to say that they merged in Kiev is no longer an option. So, well done, Vladimir. You again shot yourself in the foot, as you have on so many occasions since 2014. Thank you.